It's 12:30 in the morning on May 14th, 2008. Somewhere in rural Minnesota, a 19-year-old named Brandon Swanson is walking through absolute darkness. He's on the phone with his father. He's been talking for over 40 minutes, describing lights he thinks he can see in the distance, trying to lead his parents toward him. His father is driving through the night, calling his name out the window. Then Brandon says 2 words, "Oh shit." The line goes dead. His father calls back. No answer. He drives until sunrise, calling out into the dark fields. Brandon Swanson is gone. It begins with an ordinary phone call from an ordinary night. Brian Swanson is asleep when his phone rings just after midnight on May 14th, 2008. His 19-year-old son Brandon is on the other end. He's okay. He wants to make that clear right away. He's not hurt. His yellow 2007 Chevy Cobalt has slid into a ditch on a rural road somewhere in southwestern Minnesota, but he's fine. He just needs directions or a ride or both. Brian and his wife Annette do what any parents would do. They get up, they get in the car, and they start driving. Brandon stays on the phone. He's walking, moving toward lights he can see somewhere in the distance. He sounds calm, maybe a little embarrassed. He gives landmarks. He asks his father questions. He tries to orient himself in the darkness. Brian is driving along Highway 68 between Marshall and Lind, calling his son's name out the open window, scanning the roadside with his headlights. 5 minutes pass. 10. 20. The conversation stretches on with the easy, unhurried rhythm of a father and son who know each other well. Brandon keeps saying he can see lights ahead. He thinks he's getting closer. 47 minutes into that call, Brandon Swanson says 2 words, "Oh shit," and then nothing. The line doesn't drop gradually. There is no static, no slow fade. It simply ends. Brian shouts into the phone. He calls Brandon back again and again. No answer. He keeps driving, keeps calling, scanning every shoulder and side road until the sun finally comes up over the flat Minnesota horizon. But the fields and the dark roads give nothing back. By morning, one of the most haunting missing person cases in Minnesota history has already begun, and almost nothing about it will be what anyone expects. To understand what was lost on that May night, you have to understand who Brandon Swanson was. He was 19 years old, the age where life is still more possibility than history. He grew up in Marshall, Minnesota, a small city of about 13,000 people in Leon County, sitting in the flat agricultural expanse of southwestern Minnesota. It is a place where everybody knows everybody, where the horizon stretches out in every direction to a ruler straight line, where the rhythms of planting and harvest set the calendar more than anything else. Brandon fit that world naturally. He was well-liked, easygoing, close with his family, his parents Brian and Annette, and his younger sister. He was the kind of kid who didn't collect enemies or drama. In the fall of 2007, he enrolled at Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby, a town of about 1,700 people, roughly 20 miles north of Marshall. He was studying agricultural business. He had a plan. He had a future mapped out in the same landscape his family had always known that spring semester as 2008 wound towards summer. Brandon was finishing up his first year of college. The fields were greening up around Leon County. The days were getting longer. May 13th, 2008 was a Tuesday. There was a graduation party in Lind, a town of fewer than 400 people, 11 miles west of Marshall. Brandon went. He spent the evening with friends, the way 19-year-olds have spent evenings at graduation parties since before any of us were alive. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would stick in anyone's memory as a warning. He had his car, he knew the roads, and home was a 10-minute drive through countryside. He had traveled dozens of times. Something went wrong somewhere on those familiar roads. Exactly what, and exactly how far from home it happened would take 15 months and the worst kind of ending to understand. When Brian and Annette Swanson contacted local law enforcement in the early hours of May 14th, they ran into an obstacle that would become one of the most scrutinized elements of this case. At the time, Minnesota, like the majority of states, observed an informal waiting period for missing adult reports. The reasoning behind it was rooted in a particular assumption that adults who go missing have usually made a choice to leave. They'll come back. Give it time. The Swansons were effectively told to wait. They didn't. While the system hesitated, Brian and Annette drove the roads themselves. They called Brandon's friends. They retraced the route between Marshall and Lind. They searched through the remaining dark hours and into the morning, 2 parents doing the job that should have already been underway. By the time a formal search effort was organized, critical hours had already passed. And when investigators did begin working the area, they found something that immediately fractured the picture. Brandon's yellow Chevy Cobalt was not where it was supposed to be. Brandon had told his father he was somewhere near Lind, west of Marshall on Highway 68, but the car was found on a rural road north of Taunton, Minnesota, a community of barely 130 people located roughly 25 miles northeast of Lind. Brandon had not been where he thought he was. Not even close. His cell phone records confirmed it. The towers his phone had pinged throughout the night were consistent with the Taunton area. Not Lind, not Marshall, not anywhere near where Brian had been driving along Highway 68. For 47 minutes, a father and his son had been on the phone with each other, both moving, both searching, in completely different parts of Leon County. The geography of the case had just cracked wide open, and what investigators were left with was a question with no obvious answer. How does a young man who knows these roads end up 25 miles from where he believes he is, without ever realizing it? To understand how a 19-year-old from Marshall could be that profoundly lost without knowing it, you need to spend a moment with the terrain. Southwestern Minnesota is flat in a way that surprises people who haven't seen it, not just gently rolling, but dramatically, almost disorienting flat. The roads run in strict north-south and east-west grids through fields of corn and soybeans that stretch to the horizon in every direction. At night, without lights or distinctive landmarks, those roads look nearly identical to each other. A single missed turn, a dark intersection taken at the wrong angle. These mistakes can compound quietly. You can be miles from where you think you are before any external signal tells you something is wrong. And the terrain holds another danger that isn't obvious until you're in it. The fields in that part of Minnesota are laced with agricultural drainage infrastructure, ditches, some of them 6 to 8 feet deep, running alongside roads and between fields to manage the heavy snowmelt and spring runoff that floods the region every year. In daylight, they are visible. In the dark of a May night, without a flashlight or the benefit of familiar landmarks, they are invisible. You can be walking 3 feet from the edge of one and have no idea. Search and rescue teams mobilized for Brandon quickly once the car was found. Hundreds of volunteers joined organized grid searches across the fields north of Taunton. Aerial searches swept the landscape from above, and search dogs were brought in. This is where a detail emerged that would only become truly significant much later. A bloodhound tracking scent from Brandon's car moved north toward a small waterway near County Road 13, and then lost the trail at the water's edge. At the time, it felt like another frustrating dead end in a case already full of them. Investigators considered every angle. Was there foul play? There was no evidence of it. No blood at the scene, no signs of struggle, no credible witnesses placing another person there that night. Had someone picked him up? No verifiable sightings emerged. The two words, "Oh shit," sat at the center of every theory, examined from every direction. Surprise, fear, the sudden recognition of a fall before it happened. No one could say with certainty. The weeks turned into months, and Brandon Swanson remained missing. For 15 months, Brandon Swanson's family lived in the particular grinding agony of not knowing. His parents organized searches. They kept his name and his face in front of local media. They pushed for the investigation to remain active and for new searches to be conducted as seasons changed and the landscape shifted. They did everything a family can do in that position, which is, in the end, never enough to fill the silence where an answer should be. Then, on August 16, 2009, a farm worker discovered human remains near a drainage ditch approximately 2.5 miles northwest of where Brandon's yellow Cobalt had been found the previous year. The Leon County Medical Examiner's Office confirmed the identification. It was Brandon Swanson. The location was consistent with what the bloodhounds had indicated 15 months earlier, north of the car, near the small waterway by County Road 13, in the flat fields that Brandon had walked through in the dark on the night of May 14, 2008. The medical examiner's findings were consistent with accidental drowning. There were no signs of violence, no evidence of foul play, no indication that anyone else had played a role in his death. The most probable reconstruction, the one that emerged from the evidence, is this. Brandon Swanson, profoundly disoriented in darkness he may not have fully understood, walked away from his car in a landscape he didn't recognize. He was moving toward lights he believed he could see, lights that may have been miles away or atmospheric reflections, or simply his mind imposing hope on a dark horizon. He reached a drainage ditch he couldn't see, in a place he didn't know he was, and he went in. Oh shit may have been the last half second before that fall, or it may have been the moment he saw the edge coming and knew he couldn't stop. The water was cold. The fields were empty. The phone signal bounced off towers and traveled to a father still driving along the wrong road, 25 miles away, and a 19-year-old who had left a graduation party less than 2 hours earlier simply ceased to be reachable, a death with no villain. And somehow, that made it harder to hold. Even before Brandon's body was found, Brian and Annette Swanson had made a decision. They were going to turn what had happened to their son into something that could protect someone else. The detail that had sharpened into anger during those first hours of May 14th, the waiting period, the informal policy that told them to give it time while their son was somewhere in the dark, became the center of their advocacy. They met with legislators, they testified before committees, they brought their story into every room that would hear it, not with theatrics, but with the precise, relentless clarity of parents who had done the math on what those lost hours might have meant. Adults don't disappear by choice every time they go missing, they argued, and the law, as it existed, was built around the assumption that they do. In 2009, the Minnesota State Legislature passed what became known as Brandon's Law. The legislation eliminated the waiting period for missing adult reports, requiring law enforcement agencies to accept those reports immediately and begin active investigation without delay. It applied the same urgency to adult disappearances that had long been standard for missing children. Governor Tim Pawlenty signed the bill into law that same year. Brandon's Law has since been cited as a model for similar reforms in other states, part of a broader national shift in how missing adult cases are handled. The principle the Swansons argued, that time is irreplaceable when a life may be at risk, has moved, however slowly, into the machinery of official policy. Brandon Swanson never made it home, but his name is now embedded in the law of the state where he grew up, a monument of an unusual kind, built entirely from loss, aimed entirely at the future. Brian and Annette turned their worst night into a shield for strangers. That is not a small thing. What happened between the moment Brandon Swanson's car went into that ditch and the moment he said those two words will never be fully reconstructed? The official explanation, disorientation, an accidental fall into a drainage ditch in the dark, is consistent with every piece of physical evidence. The geography supports it. The absence of any foul play evidence supports it. The bloodhound's trail heading north toward the water supports it. There is no unknown suspect, no unresolved witness, no evidentiary loose thread of the kind that keeps other cases technically open. And yet the case settles into the imagination in a particular way. Because the horror here isn't malice or violence, it's something more elemental. It's the idea that you can be on the phone with your father for 47 minutes, telling him you're okay, walking toward lights you can see, and be completely, fatally wrong about where you are, that a familiar county can become unrecognizable in the dark, that 25 miles of quiet disorientation can happen in a car, on roads you think you know, without any moment that announces itself as the moment things went wrong. Brandon Swanson walked north through the dark fields outside Taunton, Minnesota. He heard his father's voice for the better part of an hour. He described what he saw. He thought he was close to somewhere safe. And then in the space of 2 words, in a fraction of a second at the edge of an invisible ditch in the middle of a field, that wasn't true anymore. His parents gave that darkness a law. They took the waiting period that had slowed the search for their son and turned it into a mandate for urgency that now governs how the state of Minnesota responds when the next person disappears on the next dark road. That's the kind of legacy that forms when grief refuses to stay private, when the people left behind decide that what happened to them cannot simply be allowed to happen again. If this case stays with you the way it stays with me, if those 2 words in the dark keep coming back, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and if you know someone who needs to hear this story, share it with them tonight.